Well, aloha everyone. Thanks for coming. This is a presentation put on by Lei Maile Ali'i Hawaiian Civic Club. It's strictly focused on the, as the title says, understanding the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs Resolution 14-28 in light of the rules governing resolutions. Now, there are many issues that have arisen in the past few weeks. That's not what this is about. This one is merely speaking to what role does the resolution of 1428 have with regard to the governing documents of the association, and how is it looked upon in light of the 2013 convention and the resolutions passed then. Okay, pretty much going to be hoping I can wrap this up within 45 minutes. I got about 20 slides, and then open up for question and answers. Yeah, so I want this to kind of be interactive. This is really a club matter. This is not an issue for really outside. We're talking about governing documents for the association, okay? Every member of every club in this association should be able to find this interesting, okay? This is not a position statement taken by Lei Maile Ali'i. It's merely a presentation in light of the governing documents, okay? So with that, why don't we begin? Okay. Well, the first Hawaiian Civic Club was actually created on December 7th, 1918, and they came to be known as the Civic Club of Honolulu. Okay, and its purpose was supporting initiatives that benefit the Native Hawaiian community. Now, imagine this is 1918. Okay, this is at the turn of the century. This is not too far in time from the Hawaiian Kingdom as a functioning country, okay? Prince Kuhio was also involved in this process, yeah? And it was his vision to actually have civic clubs come together, well, not come together, but be created to look after interests of the Native Hawaiian community, okay? Additional civic clubs were then formed throughout the islands along the same line as the Civic Club of Honolulu. By 1959, there are enough clubs to form the association. So the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs actually began in 1959, okay? And by creating not just an association of clubs, but also councils on each island that had the clubs within it. So what you had there was basically a three-tier organization. On April 18th, 1959, that same year that the association was established, was the first convention. And it was held at the Princess Kaiulani Hotel in Waikiki, okay, on April 18th. There were 83 delegates at this first convention that represented 13 clubs. These were the 13 original clubs: Ewa, Honolulu, Ko'olaupoko, Nana i Kapono, Wailua, Wahiwa, Wai'anai, Hamakua, Hilo, Kona, Waimea, Lahaina, Molokai, and Kauai. Okay. So from 1918, you could see how it began to spread. Yeah. By 2014, the association has grown exponentially to include 67 civic clubs that span across the islands and across the United States of America. The organization of the association is based upon decentralization, whereby the autonomy of the civic clubs are preserved. What I find interesting about this organizational form, you might say, it bears a striking resemblance to how a lot of organizations back in the Kingdom era were actually operating, including the Native Hawaiian Evangelical Association, where you had churches, Hawaiian churches within the association that were very autonomous, but they came under the association. But the churches themselves had constitution and bylaws, yeah? And they actually handled their cases on their own, but collectively they did things, but always in light of keeping the churches autonomous. This is the same concept that I found regarding the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs, keeping the clubs autonomous. Okay. So when we talk about the tiers are merely just a means of organizing, not a means of rule, or not a means of leadership. Yeah? Leadership actually is from the bottom up. Okay? So it's a bottom-up organization whereby the association at the top advocates positions taken by the clubs collectively at the annual conventions. I think that's a very important point to make. The major functions of the association are to, number one, provide scholarships to Native Hawaiian students, provide a forum for discussion of Hawaiian issues, and serve as a vehicle to express Hawaiian opinion and action. Okay. The association advocates for improved welfare of Native Hawaiians in culture, health, economic development, education, social welfare, and nationhood. Since 1959, there have been 59 annual conventions, 59, okay, that have been held, 55. It was since 1959 that 55 annual conventions were held across the islands and across the United States of America. The 55th annual convention, the latest one, was held at the Waikoloa Beach Marriott Resort and Spa from October 26 to November 2nd, 2014. Now, what do the governing documents say regarding the association? Okay, because the association is a corporation, okay, and it's very important to know. A corporation that is governed by certain rules called governing documents, okay, like any other corporation, whether it be a for-profit corporation like Bank of Hawaii, or a non-profit corporation like the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs. According to the association's constitution, one of its primary purposes is to advocate positions endorsed by the association at its annual convention or approved by the board of directors as appropriate. Now, I want to draw attention on advocating the position endorsed by the association at its annual convention. That's singular. Okay, it's very important. It's not semantics, but it's singular. What that means is the annual convention or the latest convention is the priority on what needs to be advocated. Okay, and you're going to see how that plays out. Okay, because you're going to see an evolution of positions being taken by conventions since 1959 to the present that basically are determined on whether or not information was had at a particular time regarding subject and topic. So what was understood in 1959 may not be or may not have been understood, what was understood in 2010 may not have been understood in 1960, okay, because of information. Okay. According to the bylaws, one of the primary duties of the board of directors is to take appropriate actions and positions unanticipated by and not in conflict with the actions taken by the annual convention. So again, you're seeing that the annual convention, singular, is at the center, but it also allows the board to take up other matters so long it's not in conflict with that past convention taken by the delegates. Okay. So the board of directors may take a position from any previous resolution other than the resolutions of the latest convention, on the express condition, though, that it does not conflict with actions taken by the recent convention. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Let's say, again, this is just an example, it's not true. Okay, let's say in 1959, there was a club that Miss Mary Kavenapukui was a member. And that club introduced a resolution at the convention on preserving the hula. Okay, now if that was adopted by the majority of the association, that becomes a position of that association. Based upon the provision of the bylaws, where the board of directors may take a position unanticipated, as long as it's not in conflict, they could still promote and advocate that resolution so long as it doesn't run in conflict with the resolution on that same particular topic in the latest convention. Okay? So if the latest convention comes out and says, we don't support the hula, we support jazz, okay? And they expressly make that point with regard to that resolution from 1959, then the association shall advocate that recent position, okay? That's how it works. Okay, so that was a very extreme case using Miss Mary Kavenapukui and hula, okay? Now, the annual conventions operate on the principle of majority rules, okay, democracy, in the passing of its resolutions, which are considered actions taken by the annual convention. Okay? So these actions are what is called memorialized in the resolutions themselves that have received the majority vote. Okay. As a nonprofit organization, the association is not only governed by its constitution and bylaws, but also by corporation law. Okay, now, corporation law deals with matters of resolutions, terminology, and that's what we're going to be getting into. Now, Black's Law Dictionary defines a resolution as a formal expression of the opinion or will of an official body by vote, okay, adopted by vote. Okay. A resolution is, again, an expression of an opinion. Okay. Now, every opinion must be informed. So information will basically inform an opinion. Resolutions are a reflection of informed opinions that may take it to the point of becoming a resolution. Okay. So as an official opinion adopted by vote, okay, it is important to know that it is based upon information and knowledge. It is. Which now brings to the forefront what I shared earlier. What was understood in 1960 on a particular topic maybe not, or may have been more well understood in 1980. And a reflection of that understanding would be by resolution, okay, whatever that is. Now, corporation law recognizes two types of resolutions, two types: factual resolutions and persuasive resolutions. Factual resolutions are of two types, and it's important when they use the use of verbs, okay? So factual resolutions, okay, are of two types that use verbs such as honoring, remembering, and acknowledge, just as an example. Now, policy resolutions, okay, which are one of the types of a factual resolution, is where they merely cite the fact, certain facts, but they don't call anything into action. Yeah? And the second type of a factual resolution is performance resolution, that calls for something to be done. Okay. A performance resolution, okay, that has something or calls something into being done, that has the verb acknowledge, which is a very, very strong verb, is both a policy resolution as well as a performance resolution. Now, a policy resolution is a position of facts, yeah, a consolidated or an understanding of an opinion. Now, when you have now the use of the word acknowledge, you're taking those facts and calling upon an action. Okay. The term policy is defined by Oxford Dictionary as a course or principle of action adopted. And the term acknowledge is defined as to accept or admit the existence or truth of. Okay? So acknowledge is a call to action. Okay? The position is not only what the facts are from a policy standpoint, but we are going to acknowledge it. You're taking that step. Okay? Policy is a position statement, and acknowledge, again, is a call to action. Now, the other types of resolutions you have, okay, the other type, other than factual resolutions, are persuasive resolutions that express an intent for a specific action to take place and uses verbs such as requesting, recommend, urge. Persuasive resolutions are not a call to action, but rather a recommendation that is seeking something to be done, whether within the association itself or outside of the association. And the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs has examples of that, yeah, where they make a request within the association to do something by urging, yeah, or they make a request of something outside of the association, maybe the Department of Land and Natural Resources, maybe Hawaiian Homes, to do something. Yeah? Urge, recommend. Okay. As a corporation, the association can sue and be sued. And actions taken by the association are limited to what the Constitution and bylaws assign it. Now, some people may not see corporations within the law. They just see a corporation as a group. In fact, corporations, which are allowed to exist within a system, is basically saying through the Articles of Incorporation, you are recognized as a person. So you have real people like you and I that can sue and be sued. Yeah? But once you create a body called a corporation, you basically are creating a body politic. You're creating a body that can also sue and be sued. But how that organization operates, yeah, and how it is constrained would be by its governing documents, which is the Constitution and bylaws, which assign the responsibilities to whether officers, members, whatever the case may be. Okay, so a corporation as a body is limited, yeah, and it is important that members of a corporation, of the clubs, have to understand what those rules are, not just the officers, but also the members of the clubs themselves. Because once a club joins the association, you also accept and promote and advocate the objectives and the purposes of the association. Okay. Any conduct or action that exceeds what the governing documents assign would be considered ultravirus. Ultravirus is Latin, okay, which means beyond the authority. Beyond the authority. Black's Law Dictionary states that an act is ultravirus when a corporation is without authority to perform it under any circumstances or for any purpose. And by doctrine of ultravirus, a contract made by a corporation beyond the scope of its corporate powers is unlawful. That's why it's very important to know what the corporation can and cannot do, which is very different from physical people. See, as far as physical people, we can do whatever we want, and whatever we say can and will be used against us. But a corporation is not necessarily in that same light. If the corporation does anything that it wants outside of what was assigned to it by the Constitution and bylaws, that's ultravirus. That means nothing is really being done because it is limited to what the Constitution and bylaws allow it to do. Yeah. So let's take a look at a comparison between two resolutions. This resolution was passed by the 54th Convention, the year 2013, Resolution 1335. Okay. It was passed by majority vote by the delegates, okay, and it was titled, Urging the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs to organize, plan, and execute and or participate in a constitutional convention to realize a Native Hawaiian self-governing entity. Now, this type of a resolution is not only persuasive because of the use of the word urge. Yeah, it's not a call to action. It's actually urging. Still has to follow through. But it's also a policy position because in the whereases, which is considered the preamble in a resolution, it makes specific points, and every whereas is basically an acknowledgement of an uncontroverted fact. Yeah? Or at least before the committee, it's not disputed. Okay. So, as such, it was a policy resolution, okay, because it took certain positions, not just an urging or persuasive resolution. And it took positions on sovereignty and self-determination. In its preamble, certain whereases I took out. In Resolution 1335, it says, whereas sovereignty is the ability of a people who share a common culture, religion, value system, and land base to exercise control over their lands independent of other nations. Now that, as far as it's an uncontroverted fact, actually with new information that the delegates may have, if that resolution was still binding, That's actually not the definition of sovereignty. That's actually the definition of a nation. Yeah, that's what that definition is. Okay. Sovereignty is basically supreme authority over territory exercised by a state. That's what sovereignty is. The next whereas is self-determination is realized when the native people organize a mechanism for self-governance. Again, the facts because of information. Self-determination is the basis by which a non-self-governing entity called a non-state pursues the route to become self-governing, which is an independent state, or in free association, or total incorporation. These are the terms of self-determination because it is a political term that actually dates back to Lenin after the Bolshevik Revolution, and then applied by President Wilson to mandate territories after World War I, which became mandate territories under the United Nations, and then we come to that till today. So that's where the term comes from, self-determination. But self-determination presumes you're not a country yet, but that you will become a country through a process of nation building. Okay. And whereas since 1996, the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs has adopted 20 resolutions concerning sovereignty, self-determination, and nationhood. Now, aside from the veracity of the terms, it is nevertheless a position statement by the association because it is uncontroverted by the association. So I'm just merely giving commentary on it, not saying it's wrong, because the association can pass whatever it wants, as long as the delegates agree to it. Okay? Now, you can clearly see the position statement being taken here. The position is that Hawaii, or Native Hawaiians, do not have a country, and that there are now implications for nation building and self-determination. Whereas, among these resolutions are resolutions that express support for advancing Native Hawaiian sovereignty and self-determination, including political status options such as integration, free association, and independence. So that position statement there specifically states that Hawaii is not a country, but it has a choice to become a country. And these are the three options called nation building. And the final whereas that I want to point to, which is really an important whereas, among these resolutions are those that called for nationhood dialogues and other initiatives to raise the level of understanding regarding the issue of Hawaiian sovereignty and self-determination. That is a very important whereas, because you will see that this resolution, despite some problems, is now urging for dialogue, is urging for people to learn. That's what this is about, and that's important. So the position taken in 2013, this was a policy position of the association. And whoever voted for it, they were part of the majority. That is binding on the association as well as its members. So if you were there, like Lei Maile Ali'i Hawaiian Civic Club, and did not vote for this particular resolution, you were in the minority. But because the association operates on majority rules, you got to live with it. That's called democracy. Okay? What you're going to see here is a radical shift the very next year. In the next convention in 2014. And that is where the delegates, by majority vote, passed Resolution 14-28, acknowledging the continuity of the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent and sovereign state. Now, the passing of that resolution was not easy. If you folks remember who were there. It was exchanging ideas, clarification, point of clarification, point of order. It was quite a lively debate, not just at the plenary session, but also in the committee session. But nevertheless, it was voted upon. In fact, when the ayes had it, they actually had to call for a physical vote. And that's when the sergeant at arms had to start to collect the numbers. And I found it really interesting in that once it passed, the place erupted in applause. That's quite interesting because it showed that people were really trying to get this thing passed. And it wasn't yelling, it wasn't confrontational, it was actually very professional. Yeah? I thought it was pretty cool. Yeah? I liked it. Now, Resolution 1428 was both a policy resolution as well as a performance resolution that utilized the verb acknowledge, which has stronger language than Resolution 1335 that only urged. This is acknowledged. This resolution was a complete departure from the position of the association in 2013 regarding sovereignty and self-determination. And that is because of information. That is because of dialogue, because a lot took place before the convention. It just didn't take place at the convention, but before. So it was a clear indication, because it passed by a majority, that the delegates were much more informed on the topic of sovereignty and self-determination than it appeared the previous year in 2013. Okay. This was likely attributed to many things that was happening in the year 2014. To just point out one of them, well, two of them, it's probably attributed to the ongoing research and classes being taught at the University of Hawaii, community colleges, high schools, and throughout the community. I can attest to what's going on at the university. Well, there's a lot of research going on, and it is really assisting in shifting the paradigm. But not just shifting the paradigm, but providing answers once it's shifted in many different areas. So when you have research at the University of Hawaii, it is not research done in a vacuum. It is research done through an academic process. If you're going to write an article that's going to be published, it's either peer-reviewed or law-reviewed, meaning it goes through a critique. Dot the I, cross the T's, cite the footnote. What is that original source? Is it second, third hand? That's what goes on into it. Yeah. Now, what's being taught at the community colleges are not necessarily research, but this information that was embodied in Resolution 1428 is a part of classroom instruction. In fact, people are getting graded on it. And at the community college level, the students are not limited to just your normal students just out of high school. You have a lot of non-traditional students of people who may have retired. Yeah? They come in, so they're also being exposed to this information. Yeah? And I also would like to say that I think it's attributed as well to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs CEO, Dr. Kamana Opono Crab's letter to Secretary of State John Kerry, and the Department of Interior hearings held throughout the islands and the United States. And that is when you started to see the fruits of people's knowledge. And I can tell you, I was amazed watching the DOI, watching Auntie, who looked like she retired, and she's talking about how a joint resolution can't annex anything because it has no effect beyond the borders of the United States. Now, where did Auntie learn that? That's what we teach. That's up at UH. You actually get graded on that. Yeah. So it's not making political statements. It's actually addressing with a very informed basis. Yeah. Very informed. Now, this awareness, I believe, is tied as well to the 2013 resolution, 1335. And that particular whereas, among these resolutions are those that called for nationhood dialogues and other initiatives to raise the level of understanding regarding the issue of Hawaiian sovereignty and self-determination. So it's not that the resolution of 2013 is opposite. I think it is foundational, really, to the 2014 resolution, because there is a direct link to that, to the idea of urging dialogue and education. Resolution 1428 reflected a radical shift of the association's position on the subject of sovereignty. Now people know the definition of sovereignty. People know the definition of self-determination. People know the definition or the limitation of congressional authority, executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch. What I like to say is our people are becoming much more legally sophisticated. It is no longer just throwing out words, but actually the comprehension behind the word leads to a different understanding. Yeah. I think that's powerful. Yeah. That shows what I call the sleeping giant is awakening. From a former position that assumes sovereignty to be a political aspiration, to a position that sovereignty and country was never lost. And much of the information that people are using today is really making a direct nexus and connection to our kupuna of the 19th century in the latter part, especially the signature petitions, Joseph Navahi, James Kaulia, David Kalaukalani, the newspapers. That's where the foundation of this information is coming from. It's not coming from a particular person or people. It's actually coming from the mo'olelo. Yeah. Now, in the Hawaiian language, the word for future is kava mahope. Va o manava, okay, is time. Mahope is backwards. So when you tell a Hawaiian, look to the future, basically by definition, he turns to the past. It is in that past, the time of the past, kava mahope, is the mo'olelo, the stories. And it is through the understanding of those stories that you will capitalize on the successes and learn from the mistakes. And from that, you will naturally get ike. Now you see something you didn't see before. We are revisiting our kupuna and standing in their shoes, and then we are now moving forward. That's what this 1428 resolution actually represents, as well as the information that our people are beginning to have. This position, meaning the country exists, as the new policy of the association is reflected in the whereas clauses of the resolution itself. Whereas on August 12, 1898 at 12 noon, during the Spanish-American War, the United States began the illegal and prolonged occupation of the Hawaiian Kingdom. That is an uncontroverted fact that is not subject to dispute by the association, even if it's wrong. You can point out it might be wrong, but it's a fact that is uncontroverted. But I can assure you, it's not wrong. It's specific. Whereas in 2001, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in Larson versus the Hawaiian Kingdom in the Netherlands acknowledged in its arbitration award that in the 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom existed as an independent state recognized as such by the United States, the United Kingdom, and various other states. So this whereas clause is stating, as a matter of fact, that the United States recognized the Hawaiian Kingdom as a co-equal. Okay? So it's setting a stage here that Hawaii, at this point, is not a part of the United States, but was recognized by the United States as independent of itself, of the United States itself. Whereas under international law, all states have sovereign equality and have equal rights and duties as co-equal members of the international community, regardless of their economic, social, and political differences. So the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state, recognized by the United States and Great Britain and various other states, is a co-equal to the United States despite our size. Yeah? It's a co-equal. And whereas, according to international law, there is a legal presumption that occupation does not affect the continuity of the state, even when there is no government claiming to represent the occupied state. Now, what does that mean? The term presumption is an important legal term. The term presumption is, by definition, a conclusion based upon facts. An assumption is a conclusion based upon no facts. Okay? A presumption also has the purpose of shifting the burden. Okay? That's important to know. It shifts the burden. So when you apply to presumption of innocence, a person is presumed innocent because that person has rights. And it is the burden not upon the person who is accused to prove their innocence, but rather the burden is on the opposing force to prove beyond a reasonable doubt their guilt. Beyond a reasonable doubt, which is evidence-based. So you do not argue the existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom. The Hawaiian Kingdom is presumed to still exist unless the United States can show that it extinguished it. Meaning you don't prove the kingdom exists. The United States has to prove it doesn't exist. Now there must be an intervening fact that would apply to that, which means once the Hawaiian Kingdom has been verified as an independent state, especially by the Permanent Court of Arbitration, an international tribunal, that means that it has acknowledged that the Hawaiian Kingdom at some point in time was recognized under international law as a country. The next legal fact that needs to be looked at is whether or not any intervening events could be construed to have deprived the Hawaiian Kingdom of that status and rights under international law. And the only way that you can acquire a country's sovereignty is by a treaty. You need an agreement. Even if you conquered a country, you need to have an agreement, a treaty of conquest in the case of the United States. And then I might get into issues of double issue, but we're not going to go there. That's a European process. The United States has always stated agreements, whether agreement by conquest or agreement by voluntary cession. A voluntary cession, Louisiana Purchase. A agreement of conquest, 1848, Mexican-American War, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Okay, contracts. Well, we know in our history that there were two failed attempts to get Hawaii by a treaty, one in 1893 and one in 1897. Both attempts failed, not because of America, but because of Hawaiian subjects, because of the Queen, because of individuals who understood how to kill these treaties and protect and maintain the independence and sovereignty of the country. Now, when you have a country that is already a recognized state under international law, the government is merely the organ that exercises the sovereignty, exercises the authority. You can overthrow a government, but that does not mean you overthrew the state. And a contemporary example would be, and I shared this in the committee when this resolution was introduced in 2014 at the convention. And that's what really caught people because they didn't really think of it that way. Iraq, 2003. Iraq was a recognized state under international law since 1933. Okay? In 2003, its government was militarily overthrown. But by overthrowing the government by military means, that did not equate to the overthrow of Iraq as a sovereign state. Thus comes the presumption of continuity under international law. So Iraq was still a country despite the fact that their government was overthrown by the United States. Okay? And they were at war. But again, there was no treaty. And what's going to create a damper here is, if you're going to get a treaty, how do you get a treaty if there's no government there to negotiate with? So actually the Hawaiian Kingdom was actually protected by the fact that our government was overthrown. But the state still exists. You know. Now these two resolutions though, okay, are irreconcilable and represent findings or point of view that are so different from each other that they cannot be made compatible. They're actually mutually exclusive. You cannot be a non-nation trying to become a state and a state under occupation at the same time. One cancels out the other. Yeah? But it's also based upon information or the lack thereof as far as information. But everyone should always be open to new information because that's what learning is all about. Yeah? Resolution 1335 assumes sovereignty to be a political aspiration that can be achieved through the framework of United States and State of Hawaii law, i.e. a convention. But in order to use United States law, you got to be in the United States. But that's a little difficult to explain if the Permanent Court of Arbitration said the United States recognized the independence of Hawaii being separate. That means United States law is not supposed to be applied in a foreign country. And if it is, that's a direct violation of international law because of its rights. While Resolution 1428 presumes sovereignty is maintained under international law and that the United States is an occupier of an already existing sovereign and independent state with its own laws. So if you're going to look at a convention, you cannot look at a convention at this stage of the association through the lens of American law. You would have to look at a possible convention through the lens of Hawaiian law, yeah, or international law if they actually have that provision. Well, under Hawaiian law, there actually is a means by which to have a convention. In fact, the Hawaiian Kingdom had a constitutional convention in 1864, where delegates were elected who sat together with the nobles, and they went over a constitution line by line. And to read the minutes of these delegates kind of humbles you in the fact that they understood what they were doing back then. Yeah, they really understood what they were doing. Okay. Now, according to the association's constitution, the association shall advocate positions endorsed by the association at its annual convention. This provision, however, must be kept in context. It must be read in light of the association's bylaws, which states that it is the duty of the association's board of directors to take appropriate actions and positions unanticipated by and not in conflict with the actions taken by the annual convention. This provision would allow the association's board to take action or advocate a position from past conventions to include 2013, so long as it is not in conflict with the actions taken by the annual convention, which in this case was 2014. So this means that Resolution 1335 cannot be advocated because it is in conflict with the actions taken by the annual convention in Resolution 1428. And there are no resolutions in the 2014 convention that make any reference or persuade in any way to promote nation building, a constitutional convention, or kana iolovalu, as you would find in the previous convention. The constraint of the Constitution and bylaws placed upon the association's board of directors also applies to member clubs as well as club members. Remember, this is not top down, this is actually bottom up. Member clubs have the duty to support the purpose and objectives of the association. And club members, according to the bylaws, must commit to supporting the mission, goals, and objectives of the association. Now, the position of the association may change or may not change within that year between conventions. It is the latest convention that would reflect that position. I'm not saying every convention there's going to be a change in a position, but you also may have in subsequent conventions a definite change. And that can only be attributed to information, knowledge on a particular topic and subject. So lastly, Article 4 of the Association's Constitution also states, no officer or member club of this association shall use the association as a means of furthering the political aspirations of any person. That's very important. And that's in the bylaws. So Lei Maile Ali'i cannot promote a political position. It can only promote a position that is apolitical, that is either a factual resolution or a persuasive resolution, which could change in time with information. So to access the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs Constitution and bylaws as amended, go to the association's website. Let me show you. So here's the website of the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs. There's a lot of information there. And I have to admit, I didn't really understand how the association ran until I read it. So I was just as guilty as a lot of my friends and cousins and family who didn't know it either. And a lot of times we just go by, well, that was common practice. Well, that's just the way we did it. The one thing I did find, though, in my observation of the association, man, it appears that everybody's quite proficient at Robert's Rules of Order. But they're not that proficient at the governing documents called the Constitution and bylaws, which, according to the Constitution, the regulation of the organization is by number one, the Constitution, second, the bylaws, and third, Robert's Rules of Orders. So we just have to reverse it a bit and become more proficient with the first one, then the second one, and then we go full on with Robert's Rules of Order. So if you go to the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs, right here you see resources. Don't hit search, just hit sources. It'll take you to a link here. To my right, to your right, you're going to see under resources, Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs Governing Documents. Just hit that, and it should take you to the bylaws and the Constitution, as amended since October of 2011. And with that, that's really just an overview of our association and where our club fits, Lei Maile Ali'i, as well as all other clubs. Yeah. I'm not only a member of Lei Maile Ali'i, but I'm also a member of Prince Kuhio Hawaiian Civic Club. My family's been in the Prince Kuhio Hawaiian Civic Club since, actually when I was born. Was I born? Yeah. I was born in '64. Auntie, when you guys started being a part of the club? Okay, so I was like 8 years old or something. I still remember running and picking up rounds at the rifle range at McKinley High School, the 22 caliber rifle range, because we're waiting for my mom and them and my aunties to finish singing. They're practicing. They get ready for the concerts. But yeah, so I want to thank you for the presentation, and at this time, open up for question and answers. Now, I want to preface it with the fact that I'm not going to be here to judge anything, but whatever is asked, I'm going to try to make reference back to the Constitution and bylaws, yeah, and provide additional clarity. Yes, Henry.
Isn't the association, the convention, are only available at the next convention, and yet they're the ones that would guide what it is that the association is doing?
I think that's a very good point, because that should be something taken up by the policy committee and amending the Constitution and bylaws, which Lynette Cruz of our club chairs.
Keanu, for the sake of recording, can you repeat whatever the audience says so that we can catch that, because the audience is not mine.
Okay, so the question was more of a comment, that it is ironic that the minutes of the convention are not made public until the beginning of the next convention. And it really doesn't serve any purpose, because the position taken by the association at a particular convention will last until that next convention. So every convention will have 12 months to advocate. That's how it's supposed to work. And then whatever position is taken by the following convention, you got another 12 months to advocate and implement. Yeah. And I think a lot of focus needs to be placed on the fact that what was the majority in the 2013 convention was the minority in the 2014 convention. So I think as far as the minutes, it may speak to what was actually done or not done, but it should not prevent all the clubs from advocating the positions taken by the annual convention. And I think Lei Maile Ali'i, in speaking to advocating, was education. That's one aspect of advocating a position. Doing the play, that's another form of advocating and getting education and information out. But every club should take it upon themselves, how can they advocate? But I find it interesting that if a club doesn't advocate and it speaks against the position of the convention, they're actually in direct violation of the bylaws and the Constitution itself. Yeah. Yes, Emily.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what the implications might be in light of all this information about the Constitution and bylaws and protocol in that sense. What would the implication be for now with the proposed partnership
So the question was regarding specifically the actions taken recently by the Board of Directors at the January board meeting in partnering with CNHA and SHA in moving toward a constitutional convention. Okay, that was the question that was posed. What is that in light of this information? Okay, so right off the bat, let's not look at the action first. Let's take a look at by what authority could the Board of Directors make a decision to partner. Now, to partner is to contract. That's a form of a contract. So the question would be, is the position that has been justified by the board, which relies on 1335 of the 2013 convention, is that proper under the Constitution and bylaws with regard to Resolution 1428? And what we covered here was clearly they are not the same. They are irreconcilable. Now, if that resolution, though, was passed, 1335, but it was passed by the 2014 convention and given a number 1435, okay, then what you would have is a concurrent resolution, concurrent resolutions, 1428 that speaks to the country existing, and 1335 that said it's not existing and we need to create it. The Board of Directors would definitely have a problem there, and I think that would have to be an issue that the Board of Directors would have to look at with the assistance of the parliamentarians. Yeah? So again, that's a procedural process. But what we have in this case is that that's not the case. There is no resolution similar or even faintly similar to 1335 in the resolutions of 2014 convention. So to look at it strictly from the Constitution, they can't. That would be a case of Ultravirus. Yeah? And any contract then made by extension is considered unlawful. Yeah? So that's how we need to understand the bylaws and the Constitution in order to understand actions and not to judge actions. That's why it's important, and it was clear that Lei Maile Ali'i was not doing this to judge, but rather to explain, to provide analysis, and provide people to see. Because the Constitution and bylaws should not be written in such a way that you don't understand it. You don't need an attorney or a parliamentarian to tell you what it means. That's not how it works. It's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be self-evident. And if there is a problem with the understanding, then that is a process of amendment to make it simple. Yeah? In the Army, we used to say, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. But I can't say that in the college, so I have to say, keep it simple, students. But yeah, so in answer to what does 1335 and the partnership mean, it's actually a matter outside of the authority of the corporation itself by virtue of the Constitution and bylaws. That's not a position statement. That's just an analysis. Yeah.
I have two questions. The first, you kind of covered, because 1335 is one position and 1428 is another, but because 1428 is after, it's more recent, that does not cancel out what was agreed to at 1335?
Yeah, no, it wouldn't necessarily cancel it out.
Just in conflict.
The substance of the resolutions will naturally cancel it out. So you have to read the resolutions themselves to determine whether or not it's canceled, and you cannot make a blanket statement that, well, because it was the year before, it doesn't apply. In fact, I spoke to a good friend of mine, Roth Puahala, who's the president of the Oahu Council, and he stated that it was common practice, and I did hear this from my auntie, that it was common practice in the past to advocate positions taken by previous conventions. But he had to acknowledge that those positions taken did not run in conflict with the latest convention. Yeah. So it's really the importance of continuity and not creating a disjuncture, not creating breaks. So it's supposed to flow, and information is supposed to flow. Ideas are supposed to flow, and ideas begin to change, yeah? And they become reflected in resolutions.
Okay, well, that just led me to a totally different question. If in 1428 they had said, you know, we are not going to pursue nation building any longer, that would have changed everything. they would have had to do that to kind of cancel 1335.
Well, again, you got to look at okay, so the question, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to restate the question. What's the question? I mean, I was about to answer it.
If there needed to be language in 1428 sort of denouncing what happened in 1335.
Okay, so the question was, did they need language in a resolution to say 1338 is no longer applicable, meaning it's denounced? No. 1335. No. Again, remember, resolutions are merely the positions or opinions taken and understood by the majority at a particular convention. Now, what is interesting about 1335 is not even a performance resolution. It is only a resolution called a persuasive resolution. They're urging the association to do this. It is not directing the association to do it. If you were to compare 1335 with 1428, acknowledge the Hawaiian Kingdom is much stronger than urging to do something. Yeah. So things just merely cancel out by the terms that are within the resolutions itself.
Okay, last question. In the beginning, because they are a corporation and can be sued, and they are obviously violating their own bylaws and constitution, who would bring suit? Repeat the question.
So the question was, since the association is a corporation and liable to be sued, can they be sued and where can they be sued?
Who does it?
Well, it's really anybody can, well, not anybody. Somebody within the corporation themselves who has a vested interest, let's say they pay dues, yeah, can raise that issue within a court. Now, whether it's the district court, the circuit court, I don't know. But here's another problem. Because the association acknowledged the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist, guess what? There's no court here that's legal unless you go to a Hawaiian Kingdom court. So I don't think anybody's going to get sued anytime soon. Because somebody might raise the defense of 1428. Yes, Casino.
Okay, that leads me to what I guess has happened, or maybe not has happened yet, that the association is going to do an MOU with those other organizations. And would that be legal?
Well, so the point that was brought up by Casino was that the board may be entering into an MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding with these associations, SHA and CNHA. Now, a memorandum of agreement, an agreement is called a contract. It's a form of a contract. Because the board does not have the authority to advocate 1335, then any memorandum of understanding or other form of a contract would be considered illegal if it was made. Yeah. So it's really not an issue of what you're doing, but rather by what authority are you doing it. That's the key. It's never looking at first what the person did, but looking at the Constitution and bylaws, by what authority can that individual or officer do that is in line with the Constitution and bylaws. That's why it's very important that we need to understand and know the Constitution and bylaws as well as we should know the Robert's Rules of Order. Yeah. Bruce, and then Henry.
So, if we've never lost our sovereignty, and now all this stuff about doing signing petitions, and all of that, it has now become moot because we've never lost our sovereignty, so we don't have to try and get it back. Is that correct?
From a perspective of law and history, okay, so the question was, sorry. So the question was, because we did not lose our sovereignty, then we shouldn't really be involved with Kana'iolovalu trying to achieve sovereignty or signing things or petitions and so forth. From a legal and historical standpoint, yes. Yes.
So wouldn't it
But
be a-
but from an association standpoint, we have to advocate the resolution that the country still exists. That resolution doesn't mean every member of the association has to understand everything about the country called the Hawaiian Kingdom that continues to exist. It's merely stating that we are acknowledging that the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist and its sovereignty is still intact. If anything, that should urge, or push people to say, well, what does that mean? See, and that's the part of advocating. That's called education. That's called maybe getting people who are who have the background to explain and present. Yeah.
So shouldn't we go back to the Kuya petition that our ancestors signed and bring that forward?
So the question was, should we? So the question was, should we bring back the Ku'e petition, bring it forward, and then take off from there?
Circulate.
From an educational standpoint, that's what our club does. Yeah, it is merely reconnecting people to their kupuna, whether it's their grandparents, great-grandparents who signed the petition. But there's no reason to continue where they left off from a petition standpoint, because the signature petitions, the 21,000 signatures, were actually successful in killing the treaty in 1897. It killed it. So the purpose and objective of Hui Aloha Aina and Hui Kalai Aina actually succeeded. Now that is part of the education that our people need to understand. So this is not a process by which we continue to defend, we continue to protest. They've protected the sovereignty of the country. That's why it still exists. It was they back then who killed the treaty. It was they who back then understood their political rights, their legal rights. And I can tell you from the research that I've done, which is taking place by many other scholars at the university and abroad, we have very large shoes to fill. Very large shoes. We are like children stepping into daddy's shoes, and it's like this much we have to grow into it. But we can. We just have to reconnect and get educated. That's why the resolution of 1428 merely is an expression, I think, which is very important, of the majority of the delegates, that they are well informed of the country. They weren't citing any person. They weren't saying we support this, and plus you can't, because you can't support political positions. But it does reflect and indicate knowledge and awareness. I think, if anything, we have to continue that. So the 2015 convention will have more issues coming up because it is stemming from 1428, and it should not be where we're still stuck on 1428. Yeah? Let's move beyond that. And that's why call to action is acknowledge. And when you acknowledge, you're admitting it's true. Now let me take a look at other issues. That's what I see as what is profound with this resolution, because it is not a legal issue. It is really a social issue. It is an issue that our people are now beginning to understand what's going on. And I think that is, if anything, the most important thing out of this resolution. Now, as far as how the Constitution and bylaws operate, well, that's just the way the corporation works, whether or not it's 1428 or another resolution. It just so happens that I'm using the Constitution and bylaws to explain and provide some narrative as to 1428 and its impact with regard to what was formerly understood as the position statements to now what are the position statements. What we should also think about is, what are we going to do from here? I would say since November, 12 months. This is 3 months into the 12 months. We just wasted 3 months of not advocating anything regarding the annual convention. We're spending more time trying to argue whether or not we should have a constitutional convention. And I'm not saying it's everybody. I'm just saying that seems to be at the forefront. My recommendation is we need to start to move and get some things moving regarding advocacy, regarding education, regarding the play, regarding whatever the case may be, and also advocating the collaboration amongst the clubs to better understand the resolution. Because this resolution, we can get into great detail. I mean, I teach this stuff, I give presentations, but we can pull in other people from the university in their research to share. And I think that's important. It's really a time of information. You know?
Are the resolutions in here?
Yeah, we're ready.
Yep. So actually the resolutions, convention.
On the front screen.
So
On the
convention
front
says
screen.
convention.
Where?
You go back to the previous screen. Oh,
I know the resolutions here. Go to convention and then go to resolutions. So you can download the resolutions from 2014, 2013, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. So back to 2004. And if anybody would actually do a review of that, that would be a great paper. Because you actually can track an evolution of change. That would be, you know, I might recommend one of my students do that. Extra credit. Who hasn't asked the question yet? Yeah.
So the board has adopted or has made plans to join the this partnership and ready to do an MOU. So what can we do to stop it? Or
Well-
what can be done?
So the question was, because the board has entered into an MOU or made a decision to partner, what can we do? Well, I would recommend that you folks speak within your club, and it's a club matter, and maybe get some parliamentarians involved on what you can do. Because one thing that is missing from the Constitution and bylaws, there is no process of grievance. It's not in there. So that's why I'm saying meet with your club, get a parliamentarian involved, and discuss it. Yeah? And what we want to try to do is follow the procedures all the way. And this may be a situation where the policy committee will have to take this up and possibly submit an amendment to the Constitution that would provide some form of redress of grievance. Yeah.
Meanwhile, that the MOU goes through though.
Well, it's ultravirus. It's actually void. So whatever is done outside of an authority really doesn't exist.
How do we inform them that they have no authority to do that?
Again, speak to your club, because what I don't want is for people to say, Keanu said. Yeah. I'm here to present about the governing documents and just that. But there are other issues that definitely can come up and should come up, because I think it's important that people should start talking within the clubs. Yeah, within the clubs, within the framework of the governing documents. And what should we do? Yes, Casino.
Robert's Rules of Order, okay? Do they have a section on the policy and planning of grievance?
No, they don't have. We checked. So the question was, does the Robert's Rules of Order have any provision on grievance? No. Robert's Rules of Order is only procedure during meetings. It's the Constitution and bylaws that should have that. Now, let me give you an idea of a grievance and a process. Research has been done by Ron Williams, okay, at the University of Hawaii, as a PhD, on the Hawaiian churches, okay? And these churches operated within their constitution and bylaws. And in 1893, you had some native Hawaiian pastors, Aboriginal native Hawaiian pastors, who were being directed by Albert F. Judd, the Chief Justice of the Hawaiian Kingdom Supreme Court, who was also head of the Native Hawaiian Evangelical Association, to begin to preach, directed these pastors to preach against the Queen and to promote the provisional government. What ended up happening, unbelievable this research was. What began to happen was the parishioners began to argue and they used Christianity as a weapon. They said, we are more Christian than you. And by the way, we all voted, you are excommunicated, you are out of here. And they began to remove these pastors, Native Hawaiians, from the churches. See, that's a sign of, like the clubs. It's very club-oriented, very church-oriented. And you know what ended up happening was the provisional government began to give these pastors jobs as judges for the district court. Oh yeah. That's all coming out in our history. So what's really important about information, don't get caught on the us against them or the native against the non-native. Oh no. There was a lot of natives who they didn't do the right thing. Yeah. In fact, White Paw Parker, the deputy marshal, Hawaiian native, was the one who arrested Lili'u and escorted her to that kangaroo court. So this information that comes out may not be pleasant. It may run contrary to what you believe, but it's no different than the rules and the association and everything else. We need to be open to information and processing. Yeah.
Since we're assuming that the nation has continued,
Presuming. Yeah.
Was there a grievance process within the kingdom days for an organization that was going beyond itself?
Yeah. Actually, okay, question. In the kingdom era, was there a provision for redress of grievances? Yeah, there actually was. Yeah, actually, the Native Hawaiians really make use of what is called the petition for redress of grievances. And they constantly petition the legislature, the executive on issues. Now, that's more of a constitutional provision because it's in the Constitution, the right to petition for redress. But you also have organizations that have incorporated within the bylaws and the governing documents. So I think regarding this issue of grievance, that is something serious that should be taken up as a possible amendment, introduction of an amendment to the Constitution.
But if it's part of common law or law within the Hawaiian Kingdom and that still exists, it wouldn't necessarily have to be in the corporation. It would be part of the law itself.
Well, the issue here is the issue is the corporation is a body, but that body is limited by how it was organized. So grievances would have to be within that corporation. Yeah. Now, if it's not there, then somebody could argue that it was customary practice in other organizations of a similar nature that did it this way. That could be, but it's still, I'm not going to say it is. That should be an issue for the parliamentarian to look at. Yeah. And these are very good questions because now we're really delving into how the association works and how it cannot work. The one thing we have to keep in mind is, again, the corporation is a body, but does not have the same capacity as a physical body. Yeah. So the petition of redress of grievances is a constitutional matter. Yeah. As far as a corporation and petition within itself, there has to be something there. Now, the corporation, being a body under Hawaiian law, could, as a body, petition for redress of grievances with the government, the Hawaiian Kingdom government, as a private person could as well. Because a corporation and a person can both sue and be sued. Yeah. Yes, Emily.
I was wondering if you could clarify a bit the distinction between how the association or individual civic clubs can promote a particular political agenda, I guess, and then what is advocacy? Like, how do you draw the distinction and exactly what we can and can't do?
Okay, so the question was, can you clarify the provision in the bylaws that speak to advocating or furthering political aspirations? The best thing that we can do is what you don't want to do, read into the document. You don't want to read into it, you want to read it. It has to be self-evident and it has to be based upon the way it's written. So it says, no officer or member club. Okay, now, so it's specifically saying officer, which could be a council officer, okay, or an association officer, or a member club. meaning one of the clubs of the association. It is not pointing out, it doesn't say no officer, member club, or members of clubs. Okay, so this provision only applies to officers and member clubs. They shall, no officers shall use, or member clubs shall use, the association as a means of furthering the political aspirations of any person. Now, the term political is government. Political is not, I have an agenda. Political is government. That's how it's used. So the club, or the officer, or the member cannot use the association to promote a governmental position made by some politician, or even nominate or what's the word? Endorse a politician. That's what that's referring to. So again, political aspirations is aspirations of an individual to be in government. Now that could also be open to an understanding that the political aspirations of any person could include the objective of that aspiration to get something done, but I need to get into that position to get it. You understand? Did that make sense? So the political aspirations is somebody wants to run for government, but somebody who's running for government might have a platform that says, I want to do this. I want to partner. I want to run for Hawaiian Homes. I want to be the director. Okay. That is a political aspiration. The association or the club member or the member clubs cannot support that. Yes, people.
Wouldn't Kanai Olovalu qualify as a political aspiration?
Yeah.
You can't get more political than that, what they're doing.
I would highly recommend that you get together with your club. As they say in America, I plead the fifth now. No, but these are really important issues, and I think the purpose of this presentation was not to get all the answers, but I definitely I'm sure I've gotten you to get to the point of asking more questions.
One more. This article right here
Yeah.
kind of reminds me of the IRS, who is liable for income tax.
Yeah, because 501c3 cannot promote political aspirations. They're supposed to be apolitical. But that's an American problem. We're in the Hawaiian Kingdom.
Well, you know,
According to Resolution 1428.
Brought up another thing of, okay, is Act 195 political?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
But it's,
So,
that's a good point though.
cause of Kanai'owalu and also this consortium is against the political aspirations.
So casino is, to restate the question. So Act 195 has political aspirations. True. So let's take a look at that. Furthering the political aspiration of any person, not an entity or not Kanai'owalu. But if a person has political aspirations to move Kanai'owalu, meaning that's an agenda, that's a platform they're on, then yes, that would apply. That's what I read. Yeah, that's what I read. I think the best thing right now is that we should really be focusing on our members and clubs, and I think it's we're losing focus because we're now focusing on all this. It's warranted because of what's going on, but I think we need to be reminded that we have to go, it's really a club issue, or clubs, and how as a club we must advocate the positions of the convention. So really, it's a matter of maybe we should clean our yard first before we start cleaning other people's yards. Because that's the way the association is set up. It's club autonomy. And I think it's that club autonomy that I'm trying to respect and I'm trying to adhere to. Yeah.
Can I ask my last question?
Yes, you may ask your last question.
Question is to to Lei Maile. Did anybody attend this board meeting that this took place?
Well, what I recommend, because we did speak about this before the presentation, so good point, Pilipo, but that would need to be taken up in a club meeting, because we have people here from other clubs. So this is really a presentation by Lei Maile Ali'i for clubs. Yeah.
Okay.
And hopefully it would stir more questions and more understanding, and I think people should delve into it and start reading up on stuff. That's important. So what I would like to do at this time, because I'm sure we've addressed many things, have we been able to address the main points?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, with that, I would like to say mahalo. And please share this information. Now, I was told that Scotty, who is the producer of this program and also a member of Lei Maile Ali'i, the video is going to be ready on Vimeo by tonight, because many clubs in America want to have access to it. Now, you folks notice how I said that, right? Many clubs in America. I didn't say mainland council, because 1428 says we're the kingdom.
We're the mainland.
And that's America. But they also want to see this, and they also want to understand. So this is really a matter of sharing. So once it goes out, please share that URL to other members, other friends out there, because this is really an association matter. It's not really things to be put out outside. It's just clubs. But it doesn't limit anybody from watching, because when they see this, they may say, hey, I want to join a Civic club. So with that, mahalo.
Mahalo.